Hello, it's Jim Hutchens for the Jerusalem Connection Spot Report for this week. Sometime while you're resting, let me ask you to go to Google and Google World War III. I think you'll be amazed, as I was, as to how much is being said and written about World War III. Let me give you just a couple examples. Here's one by John Galt. This may be the name he's just writing by. John Galt was a character in Ayn Rand's book Atlas Shrugged. Anyway, this is what he says. World War III has begun, and the enemy is not the one we expected. America and the Western world are facing danger they have never faced before. Our enemy is not a country or a government. We're fighting enemies who hate us so much that they're willing to kill themselves in order to kill us. This war puts our conventional military forces at a serious disadvantage. There's practically no defense against this kind of warfare. The enemy is Islam, and it's waging this war against our civilization. The Quran teaches its followers, quote, "Strive hard against the unbelievers and the hypocrites, and be unyielding to them. Their abode is hell, and evil is their destination." He goes on, if history is any guide, religious wars have been the bloodiest in human history. The contention that all wars eventually should end may not be applicable at this time. This one is different, with many generations of Islamists willing to kill themselves in order to destroy infidels. It may take generations and centuries to end. At this juncture, it is impossible to know how it may end. Our president and the left, living in a politically correct universe, refuse to recognize the magnitude of this danger. They see appeasement as a panacea and insist that acts of terrorism are perpetuated by extremists. Islam, they say, is a peaceful religion, and the majority of Muslims are law-abiding citizens, ignoring the fact that peaceful citizens celebrated the 9/11 attacks from West Bank to Jakarta to Detroit, Michigan, and the USA. The left is also ignoring numerous reports of Imam inciting crowds of hundreds of thousands of Muslims by calling for the destruction of the United States, Israel, France, Britain, and other Western countries. Since the 9/11 attacks, there has not been any report of a single Imam condemning terrorism. Not one. Let me read another just brief statement by Edward Lucas. He says this, I hope I'm wrong, but historians may look back and say this was the start of World War III. Deep in the flattened, featureless landscape of eastern Ukraine, it is all too possible that the outline of World War III is taking place. Whipped up by the Kremlin propaganda machine and led by Russian military intelligence, armed men are erecting roadblocks, storming police stations, and ripping down the country's flags. They're demolishing not just their own country. They are demolishing not just their own country, bankrupt, ill-run, and beleaguered, but also the post-war order that has kept most of Europe and us free for decades. Vladimir Putin is striking the heart of the West. We are soon to face a bleak choice. We can choose to surrender any responsibility we have to protect Ukraine and the Baltic states, almost certainly Putin's next target, from further Russian incursion, or we can mount a last-ditch attempt to deter Russia from furthering its imperial ambitions. If we choose to resist Putin, we will risk a terrifying military escalation, which I do not think it is an exaggeration to say that could bring us to the brink of nuclear war. Now, whether it's Islam or the Russians or a combination of these, there's war ahead. But I want you to keep in mind three passages and look them over at your leisure. One is Zechariah chapter 14, where it says all nations are gathered against Jerusalem, and it looks like the end until the Messiah intervenes and comes to the rescue. Zechariah 14. Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Gog and Magog war. And most scholars have believed through the years that Russia will be one of the main parts of that Gog and Magog war. Revelation 16, Armageddon, where all the nations are massed at Armageddon, and they proceed south to take Jerusalem under siege. I think all of these three passages refer to the same thing. It's a war, a climax of a war that takes place in the latter part of Daniel's 70th week, the 7-year period that begins when a world leader makes a covenant with Israel, and it progressively gets worse. So I think that's what we have to look for. But in addition to that, I want to remind you of, in the book of Revelation, we have seals, trumpets, and bowls of wrath. And it's a climax that comes to which the wrath of God destroys all opposition. But prior to that, in Revelation chapter 9, we have the sixth angel blowing his trumpet. And it says, and the four angels who had been kept for this day, this very hour, this day, this month, this year, were released to kill a third of mankind. That would be 2 billion plus today. Third of mankind. The number of the mounted troops was 200 million. I heard their number. A third of mankind was killed by 3 plagues, fire, smoke, and sulfur that came out of their mouths. That has to take place. A third of mankind destroyed. It's going to get worse before it gets worse. And so what are we to do as God's people? I think God gives us the instruction in chapter 14 of Revelation, verse 12. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the saints who obey God's command and remain faithful to Jesus. Calls for patient endurance. God, give us patience and endurance to remain faithful to God's commands and to remain faithful to Jesus. God help us. Till next week, Od Ki Yavo Shiloh, until Messiah comes. God bless you. Yavareka Yahweh, God bless you, and God bless yours.